Greetings everyone, it's Matt, and look, I know I sound very out of it right now, but I'm just mentally scattered from all of the stuff that's been going on today, and the fact that Summer Games Fest is coming up where we could potentially see Payday 3 gameplay for the first time. Yeah, that seems exciting. Of course, it's entirely possible that this might happen and therefore everything that I say in this video gets invalidated, or there's an equal opportunity that it's not going to be there and therefore everything I say is still valid, but either way, I'm just a little mentally exhausted, so, you know, I don't really have a script in mind for today, so we'll just keep things freeform and we'll see where it goes. But yeah, as you know, I love Payday 2. I've done so many videos of it at this point. And with Payday 3 on the horizon, I figured that, you know what, I want to see a few things from Payday 3 that hopefully will make the experience better than Payday 2. Because, you know, as fun as it is, it definitely shows its age. Like, the diesel engine really shows compared to the games of today. But hopefully Payday 3 fixes that. Who knows? Anyway, I figured that I'd spend this video going over 15 things that I would like to see personally in this game. Now, they might differ from your opinions if you're anticipating this game, they might not. You know, this sort of thing is worth opening to discussion. Like, I'd love to hear what you would like to see from this game. But these are just the things that I'd like to see. You know, besides the whole quality of life stuff that is no doubt going to be involved. 15 things does sound like a lot in fairness, but I'm going to be splitting this up into 3 segments. 5 things that I want to see return from Payday the Heist, 5 things from Payday 2, and 5 brand new things that Payday 3 should bring to the table. Yes, even Payday the Heist, which is little more than Left 4 Dead as a cops and robbers game at this point, does have a few things that I think would benefit Payday 3 if they were implemented. And obviously Payday 2 has done so many good things for the franchise that I feel it would be wrong to gloss over some of them. So yeah, over the course of this video, I'm going to be talking about a few things I'd like to see from both of the previous games leading up to this point, and then a few things that I want to see added for Payday 3. So yeah, let's just get right into it, shall we? It's not much secret that Payday 2 does so many things better than Payday the Heist. It has more heists, more characters, more guns. It's just overall a more complete experience than Payday the Heist. But one of the few things that Payday the Heist does have over its younger, more successful brother is the gun system. Well, sort of. You see, in Payday 2, you have a primary weapon, which is your more powerful weapon, and usually your weapon of choice for assaults, and then a secondary weapon, which is more your backup option, as it were. Over time, different melee weapons and throwables such as grenades entered the fray, but for the most part, your build composed of those 2 weapons in particular. In Payday the Heist, however, it was handled a little differently. Even though there weren't that many weapons available in that game, it had 3 options in your build. You had the primary and secondary weapons as per Payday 2, but you also had a 3rd option in the form of the handguns, which had a handful of options at your disposal, mainly to be used as your backup or when assaults were gone. They were also the weapon that you were defaulted to when you go down, acting as your last resort weapon. By combining this system with the weapon variety of Payday 2, I feel like this system could work well, especially if it was adapted in order to fit in as a well-equipped heister should be. For example, you could include akimbo pistols into the secondary slot, and akimbo heavy weapons, such as those assault rifles, SMGs, or shotguns, into the akimbo primary slot. I think more options would just be beneficial all around, especially in a game that should have as much scope as Payday 3 is going to have. I don't mind challenge as much as the next guy, but if there's one thing I didn't like about Payday 2's higher echelons of difficulty, it was that it seemed needlessly difficult. I don't mind difficulty, but difficulty for the sake of difficulty's sake just doesn't resonate with me. And indeed, the ham-fisted way that Death Sentence 1 down on Payday 2 was implemented, especially with being two-tapped by enemies in another zip code, it just wasn't fun. It just felt more like a slog than anything else. In the original Payday, it was a little bit more simple. You had the easy mode, which was restricted to First World Bank and Heat Street, but then you had normal, hard, and overkill, as well as overkill 145+, the hardest difficulty available. Instead of having the difficulties we have in Payday 2, we can have normal, hard, very hard, overkill, and overkill 145+. It would help streamline things a bit and reduce the bulk. You know, cut out filler and all that. I will say this, though, is that I wouldn't mind if, instead of focusing on damage output by enemies, it involved tactics more. But we'll go over that later. If there's one thing that Payday 2 is notorious for, it's for being a bag-moving simulator. You know, when it's not busy being a horde shooter, basically. In many ways, I get it. Bag moving is just part and parcel of a heister lifestyle. But sometimes it just gets pretty out of hand with how many bags you have to move. Especially if you're going for the Payday 2 equivalent of the overdrill. God, that's a lot of gold bags. Payday the Heist wasn't fully immune. First World Bank's bagging in the vault comes to mind. But it's a lot less involved. Once you bagged it up, it was just with you passively. Do I think bags should be removed completely? No. I feel like it is part of the gameplay, but I would just like if the amount of bags you had to move were just reduced. There are many options available to cut down on the amount of loot bags you have to bag, which I think would help the gameplay loop just that little bit more. Don't get me wrong, the dialogue in Payday 2 is great, and contains quite a lot of funny moments as well. But it feels a lot less involved, if that makes sense. A lot of the time you're just having instructions relayed to you by Bane or Locke or whoever you're being led by at the time. And most of the reactions from the crew are just, well, generic. In Payday the Heist, however, they tend to actively talk to each other and talk to the contractor as if to say, you know, what's going on? We have this update, we need to tell you about it. A particular example of this is when the heist goes loud in Diamond Heist should the codes fail.
Damn it! It doesn't work! Bane!
You sure? Okay. They must switch very recently. Our intel was super fresh. I got a lot of girls and guys. No one important enough for us to use.
The CFO's there.
Got the CFO at the party. He must have the codes.
And you know, it works. It makes it feel less like a generic, faceless experience and more like you're actually role-playing as these characters in question. I just think it would add that little bit of extra polish if the crew talked to each other and to the contractors again. Because that way, it just adds a little bit more to the story and also to gameplay, just to spicing it up a little. Even if it's as simple as just pointing out where things are or asking each other what to do, it would just be nice to see. Admittedly, this one's a bit more of a curveball than anything else, but I think First World Bank is a bit of a series staple at this point. You know, besides Dallas. And with Payday 3 set to take place in New York, which is where I think Payday the Heist took place as far as First World Bank is concerned, I feel like it would be neat as a sort of throwback to bring First World Bank back as one of the heists. Whether it be a tutorial heist to, you know, showcase some of the old and new mechanics that they're bringing into the fray, or whether it's just for a good old classic mission, I just feel like it would be a neat little experience. After all, Payday 2 adapted it quite nicely, so I'd love to see what they could do if they gave it another crack at the whip. If Payday 2 has one particular pull outside of the cast or the heists, it's the sheer number of guns you can use, and the variety to boot. Sure, you have your standard assault rifles, SMGs, and pistols, but it later evolved to having things such as akimbo pistols, akimbo SMGs, akimbo shotguns, hell, even stuff like miniguns and flamethrowers as time went on. I just love having options to choose from, especially with all of the modifications that you could put on them. I've been especially fascinated by the Campbell LMG, one of the more recent additions to the game, as well as its underbarrel flamethrower mod. I like stuff like that. And if there are to be so many weapon options in Payday 3, I hope they diversify it as much as this game does. And maybe even tap into other options that the game didn't explore either. Dual-wielding locomotive 12-gauge shotguns does sound rather riveting, don't you think? We know of only 4 characters that are returning for Payday 3, and that's of course the original 4. Dallas, Wolf, Chains, and Hoxton. But what about the others? Do we have any chance of seeing them come back? Personally, I'd like to see some of them. Not all of them, of course, I couldn't really care less for what happened to Rust. But some of them I'd like to see come back and get fleshed out a little bit more. The likes of Sydney, Clover, Dragon, hell, even Sangres or Joy or some of the less utilized members of the team. I'd quite like to see them get another chance and get fleshed out a bit more, as well as blending them in with old and new faces, of course. Vehicles in Payday 2 are a bit of an oddity. The diesel engine was effectively meant to be for cars and stuff, but it was used for Payday as a heisting game. Payday 2 has tried its hand at dabbling with cars multiple times since the car shop, but something just never felt quite right about them. Granted, the forklifts are okay, and the supercharged golf buggies in more recent heists are a blast. But the Falco Genie and the Longfellow and various other cars besides, they just feel a little bit off. On top of that, it also feels like there's a missed opportunity to not have to take control of the getaway vehicle, instead having Twitch do all the work. And, you know, it feels like there's potential for that. If vehicles are to be a thing in Payday 3, I'd love to see them have more involvement in jobs and whatnot. Whether it's just to use them as a battering ram to break through places, or to be used as your getaway vehicle. I'd quite like to get behind the wheel of some cars, especially since now we're moving to a new engine they'll actually handle properly. Well, hopefully at least. I don't doubt that there's going to be an assortment of old and new skills in Payday 3, but there's a few that I just feel like should have been base skills in Payday 2. Stuff like Forced Friendship Basic, you know, Parkour Basic, 9 Lives Basic, Transporter Basic, all that sort of stuff. I feel like that should be base abilities for Payday 3. I feel like skills such as those should be base abilities for the heisters in Payday 3. and if you want to expand on them, you can make skills for that instead. Again, not entirely necessary, but I feel like it would be a nice quality of life change jumping from Payday 2 to Payday 3. It just makes sense. With the gang being as experienced as they are at this point, it feels like they should be more well equipped from the start. And also have better ability compared to when they first started out all the way back in 2011, you know? There are potentially other skills that you could add into their base skill set from the skill set in Payday 2, and that likely differs from person to person. Which ones would you like to see get implemented in the base skill set? I don't exactly mind Payday 2's career mode, but it just seems a little bit haphazard with how it was executed. It just felt like you were going from heist to heist with no real cohesion, and on top of that, it was pretty easy, almost to a mind-boggling degree, until there was an option available that would allow you to change the difficulty at any point. I have a gut feeling that Payday 3 will feature a career mode of sorts, and hopefully it's much better than that of Payday 2. Not just in the way it's presented, but in the way it handles too. I want to feel like it means something, and has decent reward, you know? Alright, home straight time, and this is for the stuff that I would like to see added in Payday 3. Completely brand new stuff. And I think it's pretty obvious that one of the priorities should be the AI enemy behavior overhaul. The reason why the Payday series has felt more like a horde shooter disguised as a heist game is because, well, both your teammates and your enemies, they felt more like robots. Their movement was stiff, they didn't really seem to think all that much. They just sort of did things of their own accord, and whatever happened, happened. With the increase in technology over the past 10 years, I would like to see an improvement to not just the teammate AI, but also the enemy AI, to make them behave more like an actual police force. Whether it be diversifying enemy types, going in groups, or even just flanking, it would make it feel more real. Likewise, I feel like you should have greater control over your AI teammates in terms of directing them and allowing them to be involved so that they're not just glorified sentry guns, basically. Hopefully there's something that makes it feel more involved, because it's kind of monotonous to have to do everything. If there's one option that doesn't really get explored a whole lot, it's utility weapons. The only real utility weapon that Payday has ever had in any reasonable capacity was the over 9000 saw. Useful for breaching stuff and opening deposit boxes and the like, but fairly meager everywhere else. Which, you know, makes sense, it's a utility option. But it was kind of the only utility option available, and I'd kind of like to see the Payday gang dip their toes into more of those options. Maybe, for example, you could have a riot shield akin to the ones seen in the first Payday. Hinders your movement, hinders your ability to jump and whatnot, but it would provide protection for yourself and your allies coming up behind you. Combined with the 3-gun system idea that I brought up earlier, as well as the weapon variety thing, I feel like this would add a lot more options, and also a lot more tactics depending on the heists and situations you find yourself in. There's no doubt in my mind that there's going to be better skills coming into Payday 3. But hopefully there's a decent system in place in order to unlock them. In Payday the Heist it was fairly straightforward, but required constant grinding in order to get up all the way to the top, with you earning smaller rewards such as weapon unlocks or weapon modifications along the way. In Payday 2, however, you had to build up points by leveling up and then spending them in the skill tree and molding them to your build's liking. Both are decent in their own ways, but I'm hoping that the best of both worlds is brought into Payday 3, just to help reduce the strain of leveling up and grinding and all that. I don't really know how they'd solve this, and personally I'd look forward to seeing how they solve it, but it's just something that I'd like to see. Who knows what sort of skills we'd get to focus on in this game, especially considering the scope that we may get to see. If it's anything like the previous two games, we might have a lot on our hands here. Like I said earlier in the piece, I don't really mind when games get challenging. If it wants to test how good I actually am, then all the more power to it. I'll be willing to play that game and see how good I really am. But when a game becomes needlessly difficult, such as the stuff that Death Sentence 1 Down does in Payday 2, well, it just feels like a slog. I don't mind if more damage is done by enemies in higher difficulties, but I wouldn't mind if instead the focus on the difficulty was more on tactics. You know, stuff like aggressively freeing hostages or disrupting your objectives at every possible opportunity. Stuff like that is something I'd like to see implemented. It wouldn't necessarily be outright killing you, but more so trying to get you detained by holding you up. Not only would this reduce the strain on meta weapons and meta builds and all that, it would instead shift the focus more on game management and tactics, which I feel suits something like the Payday franchise better. The highest difficulty should keep you on your toes for anything and everything, especially when it comes to handling your objectives. Poor management should be punished by them being disrupted and potentially wasting more time and even risking your life just to get them back on track. But not to an extreme where, you know, you could get one shot at any possible opportunity. We need to have some balance of fairness in here. If there's one thing above anything else that I look forward to seeing in this game, it's seeing what sort of scope we get in terms of our heists. The original games were fairly grounded, with honestly something like Panic Room being the most big scope thing we've got, really. Or possibly the Overdrill, it's up to you on that one. And in Payday 2, we even went all the way up to the White House, which is a far cry from just robbing a straight-up little bank. But when you rob the White House and infiltrate it and all that, where do you really go from there? That's something I'd like to see from Payday 3. I'd love to see where we go from here. After all, there's only so many other things you can do next to robbing the White House. Since I don't think that the Nephilim storyline was neatly covered up in any capacity, who knows, maybe they could get involved somehow. We'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, that should do the trick for this video. I don't really know what's gonna happen regarding Payday 3's gameplay, so chances are it's going to be invalidated by the time this goes up, since this is being recorded before Summer Games Fest, which is the best bet I would imagine where gameplay for this game would be shown off. We'll see. For now, I'm gonna leave it here, so throw us a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and I'll see you on whatever I do next. Take care now.